Hello, nerds. The colors we're going to be using for this black armor start with dark purple as a base. Then we're going to be moving into Payne's gray to set the bluish level for the black. Then we're going to start adding white blue into the Payne's gray. You'll see that happen quite often and through multiple layers as we brighten up. And then finally white blue by itself. And then we're going to go over all of that with a combination of black wash and Payne's gray. I'm going to use dark purple on the armor because I don't want as punchy of a purple in the shadows, but I still love purple shadows, especially for black armor. I'm doing his armor as 30K black armor. So what I want to do is make sure that the dark purple just rests in the darkest shadow spots, but I'm going to push it up into where my initial highlight will go as well, and we'll define that back as we start applying the Payne's gray later. So as I move into Payne's gray, I'm just going to cover the rest of the upper portions of the model that we didn't cover with the dark purple with this color, and then we'll start moving into our highlights afterwards. So Payne's gray. And white blue are going to be what makes up the black armor that we paint here. Okay. We'll go back over it in the end with some black wash or transparent black, but we're going to do it with just these two primary colors to work up the shine. And this, I'm going to start with just a little bit of the white blue, just a basic brush tip worth of white blue into the Payne's gray to start so that I don't go too bright. About like that. And then this is where I start finding, like, where do I want the shine to live? And I'll just kind of paint around big broad strokes to get it seated on there. Don't have to worry about blending right now necessarily. I'm, again, just finding the shine and the shapes of things. Do a lot of stippling again and hardcore Neanderthal blends, we'll call these. On these larger areas like this, bigger flat shoulder pads, I'll glaze a little bit of the lighter color first. So you see it's more wet than color. Then I'll come back with less wetness and do the highlight right into that area. So let me blend it a little bit as I go. So I am a little more concerned with the blends in this area. Okay, so again, just really rough brush strokes that give me the idea of color placement more so than the blend, but is still using the right brush stroke direction to set the pigment on there right. So after we've got the first couple of layers of highlights down, we know where we want our shine to be located. I'm going to go back with pure Payne's gray and kind of do a little bit of quick blending between the dark purple and the area where our highlight color may have extended down too close. So you'll see in some of these spots where the lighter Payne's gray white blue mix have gotten a little too close to the purple. Just some pure Payne's gray, very thin, in between there will bring a little bit more darkness that keeps us in line. Let me just gradually add a little bit more white blue into the mix as we go. And sometimes we take bigger jumps than others. The thing with glazing is it's all about comfort. Right? Where do you hit the mark that makes you feel good about it and confident in your ability to apply the paint so that it doesn't give you that, you know, that feel that's causing you to say that bright colors are harder to do. Bright colors are typically hard to do because it will teach you very quickly that you have to have your brush stroke going in the same direction all the time. Like I'm glazing a brighter color right now. And if I don't make sure that my paintbrush goes from down here to up here with every single brush stroke, I'll wind up having clumpy looking bright color glaze, right? All of my brush strokes start low in my darker color and push the pigment up into this area up here where I'm at. And then you can kind of stipple it together and such. You know, and that'll keep things a lot cleaner than if I take my brush and I just kind of move it in every direction. That's something that is very, very crucial to learn, not just for glazing, but definitely for glazing. We always teach that, you know, if you've ever swept a dusty porch or dusty floor, you know how the broom works. The broom will push the dirt, which is the pigment in this situation. So if I have a bunch of dust and I take the broom and I sweep, when I stop, it will have picked up all this dust and left it in a pile here. But the broom does is it leaves a swath of that fine dust behind. So it's like a comet tail all the time. And that's exactly what painting does, right? Whenever we do a brush stroke, right, it's leaving pigment behind and it's dropping off a droplet of pigment at the end. So you move from here to here, and I start my brush where I don't want the paint, right? And then lightly glaze up to where I do want the paint, and it leaves that little, when I pick it up, it leaves that little dark spot right there, right? And so if I'm not careful, if I then go back and go this way, now I've got a droplet of pigment there and a droplet of pigment there that on the model makes it look weird. That's out of sync. So you always want all of your brush strokes to push the pigment to the same exact spot, because that way you'll get the same little comet tail behind and the pigment building up at this end, which is where we want your color. With bright colors, that becomes the most noticeable because that's the paint that causes all the contrast on the model. And so if you have it to where you're moving your brush in various directions, you've got a little bit built up here, a little bit built up here, and you're trying to have it all in one location where that highlight is, right? And that's what's going to cause you a problem. So you'll see me do that on this model. I want a good thing is like across the cylinder of the arm here, I want all the highlight to be right along this line of the arm. So if I take this color that I'm mixing over here with the white, blue, and the Payne's gray, right? And I'm using it as a you know, kind of a semi-thin glaze. Then I want to start back here in the shadows and pull it towards this middle area of this line. And then I want to come over here and start it from the shadows and pull it to the middle point of the line and have them meet right in the middle. And then I just kind of stipple the lines together so it doesn't look like I have those brush strokes meeting in the middle, right? Now here I don't have two directions to come at it, so I'll just keep all of my brush strokes coming from down here up to this area. And then I'll turn around and on this side, pull from down here back up to that same area. And again, where they meet, I'll just kind of stipple around just to make sure I don't get brush strokes looking like I had two lines meeting in the center. And then here, again, I start down in this area, pull my brush up, lift it, bring it back down, lift it, bring it back down. And I'm always pushing pigment upwards towards where I know the brightest color wants to be. And because most of my pigment's left here, this end starts to blend because less pigment is where I started and more pigment's up at the top where I stopped. So that's the key to making sure that your bright color glazes work, but that doesn't preclude you from doing something like using the transparents to help you get there and find your confidence. You may switch over later and say, oh, I don't need to do that anymore, right? Because I found my stride in my brushstroke and control of the thin paint. Thin paint's hard to control. It kind of wants to go everywhere and blur out and cause you problems. So it's up to you to kind of reel it back in by pushing it where you want it. Again, on the cylinder of the arm here, I pulled from one end here, and then I'll do the same thing underneath. Pull from that end back up, and it'll build more pigment up where the two brushstroke ends meet, and I'll be brighter in the middle here. And then here on this shoulder pad, I have to pick where I want my bright spot, and because of how the cylinder of the arm is, the bright spot's going to be right around here. Right, so I'll sketch it in first. I'll just kind of pull my paint there, and maybe a little bit across the top. Like that. And then because the cylinder is going this way and this way, then my bright spot is here on this low one. I will show that we're at that stage of metallic, right, where I'm going to have to move to a much brighter color to pull off the shine of metal, right? His armor, while not being polished steel, we assume it's painted, right, colored somehow. It still has a shine to it, right? Still would have a polish or something like that. And so we will have to make a jump to a much brighter contrast in order to pull that off. We can't keep going in small steps of adding the white blue to the Payne's gray. We got to commit and do the shine, because the shine itself, the brightness of metal, overtakes a lot of your mid-tone colors, right? The reflective shine of the light in the area or whatever winds up making a bunch of your colors non-visible. Think about when you walk up to a car in the sunlight, all the color around where the light is reflecting is not really visible. Go back down to my size 3 brush and just go with white blue by itself. So here's all of our palette where we've gone from Payne's gray to this brighter blue gray, and then we're gonna go basically white. We're gonna go bang, right? So this is a huge jump in contrast, right? It's not quite as bright as going to pure white. Pure white would be too jarring and wouldn't let us have an area to move to for highlight, right? So we just want to do this and start catching my edges first. And now it starts to bring that shine. And then when we get to the cylinders of the arm, we're just going to nestle it right into where we had those other bright colors we just did. And this is the part that really makes your non-metallic, or what we call reflective surface painting, come alive, is when you do this color right here. This starts to give you the I'm succeeding or I'm failing part. You'll feel less good about it if you haven't taken a big enough step. If your color that you're putting on right now isn't bright enough, then it won't feel right. And that will be what makes the piece you're painting just look like, in this case, I was just painting gray if I go too bright on my midtones. And then this color seems like a natural highlight for the last color, then I'll lose the idea of a shine, right? And it'll just feel like the highlight that should have been there anyway on gray armor. This also makes all of the other colors on the armor look a lot darker immediately, right? So we immediately start to see that all of the blue grays tend to look much darker than they did a second ago as I put more and more of this bright color on here. And then that light would travel right across that same line to here, so I'm just going to make a bunch of horizontal thin brush strokes to mark my shine spot very lightly so I'm not upsetting the color too much. Right, but that's where my shine's going to go. So we're just going to, again, make these horizontal strokes, all going in the same direction, just like I told you before. These are all going from bottom to top, or low to high, however you want to do it. I'm going to skip doing anything around this spike because it'd be kind of a shadow spot there. Right. And again, just doing it really rough to spot your color in first. This doesn't have to be done very neat. You'll get used to being a little looser with your brush strokes as you learn this, but there's no reason to waste a lot of brain power saying, oh my God, this has to be perfect right now. You'll play with how thin this paint is as you go. I'm being able to see the darker colors underneath. This lets me play around with putting it in the right location, but not having it be irreparable if I don't like it. And now we've got the blockiness that I'm looking for that gives me the idea that, yeah, I really like that. I think this piece looks good from that direction with that shine on it. So now as we start moving to the chest, we're going to repeat the process we did on the arm, but you'll notice the shape is different here. The chest around the pec region starts to form more of a spherical shape. So as I start blocking in my highlights, rather than being able to do it in a linear fashion like we did along the arm, I'm going to have to kind of do a radial. You'll see me pull my brush strokes towards these little rivet sections up at the point of the chest. So my brush will move from the darkness up around the armpit to that rivet, and I'll pull that around in kind of a radial fashion to where all my brush strokes end in that area around the rivet, and then we'll repeat it over on the other side too. The way that I attack it is to just kind of block in very sketchy style where my shine will be. It's just two colors, Payne's gray, white, blue. We start adding in little bits of white blue as we go to get a little bit brighter color, a little bit brighter color, a little bit brighter colors. We started here with a little bit of a, dark gray bluish kind of color coming out of the Payne's gray, then here, and then now we're at that point where pretty soon we'll be using pure white blue for the highlight. But I need to get all of this sketched in, right? So like that shine right there is a little tight, so I probably want to extend it to where my glow is a little bit broader across the top of this shoulder, because the shoulder's so big. I don't want it to be so mirror-like. If your bright shine is in a really small pinpoint position, might make it seem like it's too polished. You can think in terms of, I always try to think of what nerds can recognize, and Darth Vader is one of the ones where his helmet was so polished that you could see the round lights from the ceiling as round, bright circles in the black. That's highly polished, like glass black, polished armor. That's not what I'm trying to create. So the more tight you bring your highlights, the more they become pinpoint sources of light, like they're reflecting the tube in the background or whatever, or the round circle of the sun. That would be a more polished shine. I'm looking for a broader, less polished, battle damage kind of a scenario going on here. So I'm hunting around the model with this sketch type style to find those highlight shapes. Going in with a very thin glaze of the two mixed, so it's kind of a mid-tone, not too bright, not too dark, and glazing that in there to kind of now start my blends before I go in and hit it with the real bright highlight. So you can see I'm working in this still. It's still a dull, like Space Wolves gray, actually, But what I'm doing is I'm running it super, super thin so that as I bring it here, I'm being able to start deeper in my shadow with it. So my brush touches down here, even where I have that dark purple, and pull it back up through all of those mid-tone colors. And that starts to build a blend. This is the power of glazing to kind of correct the sketchiness. I say correct, just to kind of finalize and start pulling the sketchiness that I've painted this whole thing with into focus, if you will. Well, in this case, I'm glazing with the mid-tone because what I'm trying to do is pull the shadow colors and the highlight together before I put the really bright stuff on there. So I find myself glazing with mid-tones more than anything else, I guess is the way to put it, because they will then pull everything to a center point. Think about how you balance a weight. You've got a light weight on one side, a heavy weight on the other side. How do you balance those two? You can't add a heavy weight to the light side, right? And you sure can't add a light weight to the heavy side. But if you balance it by adding a medium weight to the light side, right, then you'll find your balance point. And so that's what I'm doing. Consider the colors as having weight. And the highlight is generally going to be in a much smaller area than the darkness. So I'm coming in with a mid-tone and spreading it throughout the rest of the armor plate to bring those together and balance that little bitty spot of brightness in with all of the big sea of darkness around it. Not the best analogy, but I think it works. But yeah, I find myself glazing with midtones more and more as I'm doing this portion of the work. But now that we've glazed over it, it will have darkened that white blue a little bit. So now by adding the white blue back in, I'm going to get that really big, heavy punch of shine one more time. On the cylinder of an arm, you just want to find that line, so to speak, of where your shine is going to run down the length of the arm. And I'm just going to start sketching that in. So you can see how my brush strokes, I'm using them to give a texture that acts as a weathering. You know, if you look at this, each time I'm going in and doing my bright shine spot, right, I'm going in and adding a line and then a bunch of really small lines that give it not a scratched look because they're all symmetrical, so to speak, but it means that there is a texture. you know, you can imagine had you run a piece of sandpaper across that armor, it would leave those kind of little nicks in it. So rather than blending this line into one smooth transition, I like having these little textures. So that is weathering along the way. What happens is that, yes, at this stage here pretty soon, I'll start adding in like scratch marks and things too. And that will then help solidify the level of weathering that I'm doing for the given piece. But I typically think of the armor as what would it look like if it were newer, and I paint it to that, and then I add the weathering in towards the end. Radial highlights like what I'm doing here are pretty difficult for people. One of the ways that you have to do when you're going, because the chest is like a sphere or a spheroid, right? And it typically is kind of a combination. It's a cylinder as it goes down the trunk of the body, but up top towards the shoulders, it starts becoming more of a sphere. And armor follows that sphere. And so you have to bring these highlights, like kind of pick your spot like we have, and then bring your highlights in this kind of star pattern, this starburst, where I'm bringing lines towards this little rivet area all around. And then glaze to get rid of the little starburst lines, unless you like them. Sometimes they look really cool because they're like little scritches in the armor. But I'm having to just kind of pull in light glazes of bright color my brush strokes up towards the rivet or down to the rivet, depending on where my direction is. So again, just creeping around the model, finding spots to bring the shine and the brightness in, knowing this whole time that I'm going to go over this with black wash. Probably a little bit of black and Payne's gray wash. I get to cheat and use the products you don't get. And I'll just continue to find these nice bright spots, and I'll actually include some of my own that'll create scratches, understanding that I can use this brightness now to put more texture on the armor in spots where I want, dents and dings that may not be in the sculpt. So you'll see me adding little lines for scritches and scratches along the way at this point too, because I want all of these to show up and then get darkened by the black wash we're going to apply. I need to be able to pull like brightness, because even though this won't have necessarily a edge highlight down here on the lower part of the elbow, I'm pulling brightness in because what it shows is that there's been enough of a ding that's deformed the metal to where now there's a portion of that ding that's pointed back out and catching the light, right? So I'm highlighting the bottom of these little dings a little bit. And it adds just a lot of texture and life to the model that in this case isn't on it. But I do like the idea of, you know, stuff looking a little bit more battle worn. So just more white, blue, and Payne's gray, and glazing, as we've been talking about, pulling that bright color down into my bright spot where my shine is, and just keep working it until I'm happy with how bright it is. Started doing some secondary reflections down here. Whenever you have a cylinder, you'll get your main shine spot along the cylinder, which we've chosen here, and then as the elbow goes, it switches to here, and then back here, right? And what happens is you get a secondary reflection or glow off of, like, a lot of people like to call it the bounce light. Like, imagine this same light that's hitting the armor from the top is also hitting the ground below. And so you get a reflection that comes up from the ground back onto shiny surfaces. And it'll be a lot less intense, right? But that's what this represents. And you might get a shine on this side from the armor, right? The light reflecting off the armor back into the arm. And so I create some shine back here as well. So you're always trying to think when doing reflective surface painting like non-metallic metal, what things are creating light in the model, not just the light source being the sun and such. All right, so I'm gonna get some black wash, Pazzow, this one. And then I'm gonna wish I knew where all the new colors were, Christopher. The colors that shall not be named. The ones that people get mad at me for using. Because in the 24 colors coming at Adepticon, we have, I mean, a Payne's gray wash. What? 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 Why would we do such a thing? Because it's cool.
So you're going to use paints that people can't use.
Yeah. Oh, look, a Payne's Gray wash. Who knew? My goal here is to create a wash from our products just because we have a fantastic black wash that can be used as a filter. The thing with washes in general is that they are just like glazing, except the chemical component in the paint allows the wash to flow easier over the surface of the model so that you can kind of put it on in large amounts, and the pigment itself kind of goes to the low spots. We'll fill in shade areas, panel lines in between, armor plates and things of that nature. We won't be using it for its wash quality. We're simply using the black wash for its color, black, and the fact that its opacity is already where I need it, so that I will be able to allow the bluishness of the armor we've created to show through to give the undertone of black, and let this bring black back into being the actual color of the armor. Make sense? Now, in order to make sure that it's not graying out our color too much, I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to use a little bit of the Payne's Gray wash that'll be coming out at Adepticon. You could also add just a touch of Payne's Gray paint to here. If you do that, you would want to add like literally 1 drop of Payne's Gray to what you're going to see me add for black wash. Since I have the Payne's Gray wash that's already thinned down, you'll see me add more. So do some black wash, about that much, because we're highly scientific here. So that was about 6 drops. And then we're going to take some of the Payne's Gray, and we'll do, I don't know, about 1/3 as much, maybe. And I will mix this and test it before I put it on the model, because the goal here is to always verify your findings before going and messing up something. Because when glazing and filtering, you've already done a lot of work painting, so don't just throw it on the model before you know what it's going to do. Okay, so to that, I'm going to add some water. We keep these eye wash bottles around, and I'm just going to put a little squirt of water in there and then mix that up. When mixing paint, it's always better to use the butt end of the brush than the filament end. There's no need to use the brush end of the brush. Use the stick end of the brush. I'm happy with that. That's a good color. Just a little bit of water to make them flow better, and I'm going to be using them as a glaze, showing you how you can use what are called washes in other ways to get filtering done. So we'll set that aside and we'll just go for it. Just like with any other thing that I'm doing that's very thin, I'm going to take quite a bit of it off on my thumb palette and then go over to the model and start layering this on. I'm just going to cover the whole area. I want to make sure I get everything, starting in the shadows from where we had our purple and working back up towards the highlights. Right, so again, over the entire thing, highlights and all. This is why I wanted to test it on my hand, make sure the opacity was where I like it. You want to keep moving when you do techniques like this, glazing over entire areas. You want to make sure you get the paint on an entire surface. So if I were to do this part of the elbow, let's say, come down here, do the bottom, right? Come up here and leave my brush strokes kind of like this up on the top to where it didn't finish the area. I just kind of came up here and then go paint somewhere else. The problem is I could get a line that dries across there and makes that really hard and visible. So I want to make sure I come back with another layer before all that dries and finish this portion of the elbow before I move on to anything else. You can see you can see more from wetness where I've painted than in tint of the color, because the color is so thin, right? But it is slowly darkening all that up. You can see the difference between the highlight on the arm and the highlight on the shoulder plate. See how much brighter that is? And this is starting to now tend back towards a gray because of the addition of the black. So now I'm starting to look dry around the arm, so I'm going to go back over the arm with more color. Right? So again, same thing. I'm going to just start here so we get the impact of going over the highlight on the cylinder of the arm with the wash, and you'll see how pass number 2 has a huge effect. Now you can start see how that is believable as a more black armor. Not black painted, but like a dark steel. Let that set up for a little bit, because I do want to do the highlights back on it to show you what the punch of the highlight is going to do. Now, you have a choice when doing the black like this, trying to give the feel of like a gunmetal armor or something of that nature? Do I go back with white blue that has a hint of cool tone to it? Or do I go to like bright neutral gray, which does not have that cool tone? Both are available to you. I'm going to go back with white blue because I like the bluish nature of what we've created. But understand you could go to a neutral gray here too. And then we'll finish out with white. But you don't want to go white directly over the top of this. It might be a little bit too much. So we'll just go back to white blue. Just pure white blue. Very, very little thinning, if any, on this, because I want a lot of punch from this color as we put it on. So notice how this pure white blue I'm putting on blends into the previous white blue that was on this edge that went for longer, that now has become a darker color because of the wash. So that gives me a blended highlight. Watch how as I go through here, my goal is for each of these little spots to not trace over all the previous color. I just want to put a little bit on here. And that's really the trick, to make sure that when you're going back over the filtered surface, that you're using the darkened white blue highlight as a way to get a kind of mid-tone highlight for this final step that we put on. But you can see how you need to sneak that shine in, right? I have this shape. It's like a T, right? Where I have a little bit of highlight going along the circumference of the cylinder here, and then I have this rectangle of shine coming down. So what I'm doing is I'm putting what I call a tornado shape inside that. I'm pulling a little line of brightness, using some stippling to tailor it off, and then starting with longer lines and then shortening them up, and then just dots. So it has this kind of, you know, tornado shape that sits inside that T, and that gives you your final highlight. Here I'm just stippling in a little bit of shine on the breastplate here so that I can make it conform to the kind of radial, circular, spherical shape of the breastplate. So it all started from dark purple in the shadow areas of like the here, right? And under here, you can get that feel of the purple, which I like as a shadow color. Then you can see a lot of the Payne's gray blue on like the belly plate because it's all in shadow, so I haven't highlighted a lot of that. And then you get hints of blue up through here as I move it, right? And then it's all white blue added into that. So this is entirely Payne's gray and white blue as the metal, like the armor color. And then I made a concoction of black wash with a little Payne's gray in it. So it's still a hair bluish, but barely, right? And I thin that down, and I use that black wash as a glaze and put it over the top, and that's what then gave me that grayishness to the highlights that pushes it into the realm of being black. One of the tricks in painting, right, is understanding what you're about to do to the model, what other next color you're going to use, and what that's going to do to the visual impact of the model. That takes experience and practice. There's nothing I can teach you other than to tell you and have you sit in the back of your mind so that when you do it and you recognize it, you have your aha moment. Because it just doesn't, it's one of those things that until you put it into practice, doesn't seed in. If I paint something brighter on a model than all the colors that are already on it, the model gets darker. Everything you're seeing right now, including the little doots and deets of white blue that make it look so bright right now, if I go on with white on this, those deets and doots get dark. And so I think about it in terms of I don't want to push this armor any further, because when I do the non-metallic gold we're about to do, this whole shoulder is going to be non-metallic gold. Right now it's black. So right now it's making everything around it look brighter because all the areas that are still in the dark, it's dark neutral gray primer that we use. But the dark neutral gray primer is so dark that it makes everything around it look brighter. As soon as I start putting yellow on this, everything around it starts looking darker because I start overtaking it with brighter colors. So again, it's why I talk about painting in steps. Start with doing something to where you think it's like 50% done. Don't push yourself to say, okay, the armor's got to be perfect before I move on to the hair, or the armor's got to be perfect until I move on to the sword. No, don't do that. Don't spend all that time, because you'll find out you're wrong 99.9% of the time, because you'll paint the next color on the model. And unless you've done this exact same model in this exact same color scheme before this, you won't know what's going to happen. So start putting the next colors down, and you'll start seeing how this will either, this armor could look too blue once I put the yellow on there, because the yellow will be a totally warm color and it might make the blue really stand out on the armor. You won't know until you do it. So, you know, playing around and making sure that you take the time to, you know, let the model find its way, so to speak. That's kind of hippy dippy, but you get my drift.